Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm Rob Kent, the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. These are the stories of middle grade 11-year-old detective and genius inventor Banneker Bones and his cousin Ellicott Scoworth as they fly around on jetpacks and take on giant robot bees, alligator people, and a untitled third nemesis to be revealed in the near future. If you like me, you like the show, don't you want to know if I can write good news? You can find out for free. Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees is available as a paperback and audiobook narrated by the exquisite David Radke, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get yourself a copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Once you're hooked, come see me for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. Bring money. Next time you're at your library, if your library does not have a copy of these paperbacks or the audiobook, go ahead and request that they get a copy. That way you can read it, and so can hopefully anybody else there in your town. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write horror novels such as the young adult novel All Together Now a Zombie Story, and All Right Now a short zombie story. Very scary stuff. There's no profanity, but it's no holds bar on everything else. All kinds of violence, maybe some sexy situations. Who knows? It's the apocalypse, so not too much romance, but some. And then I've also got the Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel. This one's straight for adults. This is in the style of Stephen King, heavy profanity, heavy violence, heavy everything, and it escalates each chapter you go. So Book of David, Chapter 1, the first volume, is free to download as an ebook, so you can get a little taste. Book 2 is even crazier. Chapter 3, crazier than that. By the time we get to Chapter 5, it's your own fault for not stopping. It gets really crazy. So we got aliens, we got ghosts. Talk a little bit about the government. Who knows what could happen? It's a good time. Coming up here on the show, we're going to take a break for the 4th of July. But we will be back on July 8th with M.G. Hennessy, and then we'll be back on 7/11 with author Debbie Daddy. So both of those are going to be amazing shows. Make sure you find your way back after the holiday. Since it's the 4th of July, I'm sure you're feeling patriotic. Do your patriotic duty. I'm not going to get political on you, but as of today, June 25th, 2019, impeachment hearings have still not been started. Contact your representatives. If there's a protest in your area, head out to it. We've got concentration camps in the U.S. This cannot stand. This criminal president must be impeached. Call your senators, not to get political. All right, that's it for the news for today. As always, check out middlegradeninja.com for interviews with authors, publishing professionals, like tonight's guest, who I'm very excited to introduce, editor Diana M. Pho. Diana, how are you this evening?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time. I usually ask our guests to start. I'm terrible about summarizing other people's books and other people's biographies. So if you just start by telling the esteemed audience a little bit about you and your background in publishing.
Sure. I've worked in publishing for about 12 years now, almost 13. And, it's pretty much like, been the industry I've been involved in since graduating undergrad. So I guess you can probably calculate my age now. Sorry about that. I acquire for adult, young adult, middle grade, and graphic novels, mostly working in science fiction fantasy. I work for Tor Books, which, as you may know, is one of the major science fiction fantasy publishers in the United States. I also acquire short fiction for Tor.com Publishing, which is like our novella arm of the program. So I figure that's a good start. Yeah.
And that is the illustrious Tor office there behind you, correct?
Yes. I was telling Rob earlier that this is like one of our illustrious phone booths. We actually moved offices. We used to be in the Flatiron for over 30 years, and we moved 2 weeks ago further downtown it's another historic building. It's a larger space. But unfortunately, it's also open planning. So I figured, like, instead of like us sitting and seeing my really boring looking cubicle, you could have this like nice colored room with like the beautiful like mulberry wine walls. So
I think it looks fantastic. I am deeply jealous and wish I could be there with you in the city, living the dream, working there in big publishing.
I'm sure we'll get more into that later, but I definitely think a lot of people really get excited when they think about, traditional publishing, especially when they think about the big five publishers. And it's definitely, I'm feel like extremely fortunate to be in the industry for so long, working for like so many prestigious people, basically working with authors that I enjoy every single day. But it's definitely not without its challenges, especially living in the most expensive city in the country.
I've been, you say that, I've been asking as many publishing professionals as I can, when do we imagine that the big five might start to branch out and maybe move to the Midwest? You could get a real nice office building here in Indianapolis for, I'm sure, a fraction of the rent of what Tor is paying downtown, or even if they had more remote editors. So what is it that still requires everybody to be central in the city, or is it just at this point legacy that it's always been done that way?
It's a lot of different factors. I'm not going to discredit the legacy factor and the storied history, that publishing has in New York City. And I think a large part of it, is having access to other media giants. Being a media giant that publishing is in itself, and especially when it comes to the creative arts. A lot of projects are really fueled by passion, and I think it is a very, I would say it's kind of an old school perspective, but it does have legitimacy when you talk about enthusiasm and face time and being able to convey energy in a room, or like at an agent meeting, or seeing someone like in person. And being able to explain to the sales force, like, this is exactly why, I love this book and that you guys should really be into this too. And I think that has, a huge factor into like why traditional publishing, has stuck around New York for so long. But I do think that overall as an industry, in order to evolve, you'd have to be more flexible in terms of like how you manage your workforce and the opportunities you can provide. And, so that's like a smidgen of like all of my thoughts about that, but, I hope that helps.
Let me ask you this. So you're there in person and you get a manuscript that comes to you, a submission that you're very excited about. You're like, oh my gosh, who is this Maurice Broaddus character? What an amazing novel. I have to acquire this. How many people do you have to go out and talk to and get on board before it's a go?
Well, all publishing houses have a different, acquisitions process. And so what I'm explaining, is very much related to Tor. So that's like my caveat right there. So, but most, but the other big five have a very similar structure. And I think like most publishers do, but how formalized, informalized it is, like whether you're talking to like a room full of people, or like five people or just one publisher, that might be the big difference in terms of scale. But, in terms of the process as a whole, I think here are like, the basic elements of it. So first, when I see a manuscript, I love it. I have some of my colleagues look at it. They love it. I might show it to like, the VP of, of marketing. I might show it to the, the head of publicity. I might show it to the publishers themselves and be like, hey, I saw this. I think it's amazing. I want you to read it too, and make sure it's not just me, suffering from like, submission syndrome. Like when you like read so many submissions and that weren't very good, and then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, is this brilliant, or is it just like I need a temperature check? I want to make sure it's just not all, in my head because I read like 30 things I rejected.
So like this is a polished turd and a pile of crap. So oh my gosh.
Right. So so after I get those second reads, then what I'll pull together, an acquisitions packet, and so for that, it's just basically like, I talk a little bit about what the book is about, what the author's about, how I see us publishing the book. Like, do I see it as hardcover, trade paperback original? If this is potentially a series book, like if I was given like one manuscript and also a synopsis for like, here are two sequels, then I'll think about, all right, so what would the theoretical publishing plan be for like the whole trilogy, all this, stuff even before I bring it to acquisitions. Because one of the things that I like to do as an editor, and I think we like to emphasize at Tor, is that, to be able to get books to the readership that needs the books, and so there has to be a lot of forethought, even in the very beginning, about possibilities of how to do that. So I pull up all that stuff together. I also put together what we call a profit and loss statement, or a P&L statement. And that is basically a calculation of all the production costs that would take to create the book, plus overhead, plus, you factor in the advance that you want to give, the royalties the author would have as part of the deal, like all the stuff together. And because you have to make sure that, what you think the book will sell will be enough to accommodate for overhead costs. And that's actually one of the challenges you often get. And that's when we say that is when publishing is kind of spinning the roulette wheel and making a good estimated guess, because no one actually knows how much a book will sell right off the gate. It's just your gut, your taste, what other people think of the project, and also how much it costs to like pull it all together. And of course, the other element is comparison titles, or also known as comp titles. Like, what kind of book can I compare this book to as a yardstick of how I think this potentially can sell, So anyways, bunch of numbers, pull them together, see if the calculations come out, in a way that seems reasonably favorable for like us to produce the book. And so then I can take all the information and bring it to our acquisitions board. And, and for Tor, the acquisition board, consists of like the publishers, but also, heads of all, our major departments. And then we have a discussion about, whether they all agree with this plan I created of all these, stats I put together. They're like, oh yeah, like this is very believable. I think this is a project that's worth investing in. We should go for it. And, we have all these numbers, to conclude to like, all right, this is how we'll talk to the agent. This is like what we think we can offer for an advance, all that stuff. And that is when I can actually go back to the agent and be like, all right, here's our offer and here's what we can provide for you. And then I go into negotiations with the agent. And if, the author and the agent agree that our offer is favorable, then that is how I bought a book. So
very cool.
Yeah,
There's
it's a long ball process
to unpack there. So I'm going to ask some questions. I often think of my role on the show, aside from charming, handsome host, as useful idiot, because I ask the questions I'm too dumb to know I shouldn't ask. So I apologize if one of these comes off as just a little bit rude, like asking a fellow salesperson about their numbers. But how often does it happen, how often does it happen that you put all that information together for a project and then you get shot down and have to go back to a new manuscript, even though you love the one, but presumably you love the one you just pitched?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, everyone gets told no on all levels of publishing. So it's not just the authors, it's not just the agents, but editors too. I've definitely, gotten told no after like, during the second read stage, like, if other people didn't think the manuscript was strong enough, or if I approached the publisher for tentative talks and they looked at it, and they said like, well, like, I don't think, it's as great as you think it is, prove me wrong. And if I can't prove it, if I can't convince them, then the project dies even before I bring it to the board. Or, because usually by the time like I bring it to acquisitions, I'm like 90% positive that people will be okay with it unless someone brings up a serious red flag concern that totally kills the whole thing. And that has happened, it has happened like, in terms of like, oh, I don't know, and usually it's something that's sales-based. If the author has a project and I really want to buy the project, but they have a poor sales draft that I can't argue myself around to convince them that like, no, we should invest in them because it's a different project, different book, that happens sometimes. And that's only like one example of like, of the various levels of like when I am told no before I acquire something. So.
And that's even if the author is writing this book in a new genre, different from whatever book might have flopped in the previous genre.
Yeah, it really all depends, because I think that having an author start in a totally new direction that they previously had written in before that didn't do as strongly is like a really great way to give an author a soft reboot and promote them to a publisher. And so it really all depends on the project, what the new direction is, whether we can, I'm sorry, are we checking something? Oh, okay, sorry. And whether, whether like the acquisition board believes that the direction is different enough that we can still invest in them. Whether there's other buzz around the author since the publication of their previous books that would encourage the publisher to like give them a second chance. And oftentimes you might notice like authors, being published by one publisher and then they have a totally different project, another publisher. And when you see cases like that, usually it's because, if for some reason they decide not to continue the working relationship with their previous publisher, they'll try someone, a new publisher to continue their career. And that's perfectly fine. And sometimes when authors choose to do that, it could be because their sales track was poor and their previous publisher had doubts about the next project, even if it was drastically different. So they had to like move to another publisher entirely who believed in that project and believed they could overcome the sales track. And sometimes, and oftentimes it happens. Oftentimes, like, authors, jump houses, from project to project, because they're looking, for that particular project to find its best home. And sometimes that best home isn't with a publisher who published their previous work that didn't do it strongly.
And presumably now that you've got, I think about 8 years with Tor at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So a vast amount of experience in publishing, plus some jobs prior to working with Tor. Presumably you've taken some of those harder being blindsided by things you didn't see with the book, so that your track record, I would assume, is improving at this point when you go up to bat with your team.
Yeah, so like and that's actually another factor. When an editor has worked for a long time at a certain publisher, like everyone knows their style, everyone knows their taste. And it especially becomes more apparent because you're always doing second reads for your colleagues. So that like, hey, I'm reading this other like high fantasy, that my colleague is going to acquire. Like it's because I think it's good and I know it's their taste, and I just want to affirm their taste, even if I might not acquire it myself. I'm like, I can tell you it's good. Even though I won't buy it for myself, like you can buy it. I know that's what you do, and you'll do it well because that is part of your list and that is your strength. So having that teamwork understanding, between editors, but also between the editors and publisher and the editors and sales force, also helps instill that level of confidence. So you're right. Like when I was a newer editor, and started acquiring, it was kind of like, it was more of a chance to prove myself and to prove what kind of taste I have. Because at that point, like aside from like, my immediate superior who like mentored me or something, like no one knows what I like. None of the sales force, probably have never seen me present my own book at that point. It kind of gives, so for newer editors, you do build a reputation through the books you acquire, how well they do, what kind of books like, you're attracted to. And Salesforce definitely pays attention. They definitely pay attention. Like, I was at a sales meeting, recently, for example, and one of our senior editors was explaining like, how they bought, this 5-book series from an author that's coming out, and it's going to be published very quickly, like, many installments with like a little bit of time in between. And they had a really short but to the point presentation about saying like, all right, this is the third book in series. usually are the launching point, because that, because as we know, that is when the readership has been built up enough and encouraged enough faith in the author, to help continue a series from that jumping off point. And they were right, but I think if they hadn't been working in publishing for over 20 years, they couldn't have, said that and had the sales force be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's true. I don't think I could have said like the same thing in that same way in less than 5 minutes, and be like, all right, that's all I have to say about this author. Just trust me about this. And they're like, yeah, we can do that.
You gotta have a pretty good reputation to pull that one off, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I had a burning question for you. It was right on the tip of my tongue, and now it's gone. We've all lost something. I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that it's going to come down a lot to what you like. So let's start there. What do you like? What kind of what attracts you to a project? What gets you to say, if not yes, maybe I'll at least read a partial on this?
Well, I like to think that like I have a general, very wide taste, but also very particular stylistic things that always grab me. And I think that is when you are a newer editor is something you have to build. And you don't build that until you read hundreds and hundreds of submissions and hundreds of already published books, and then realize like you got to really think to yourself, why do I like this? Can I break it down in a very explainable way? And can I recognize it in its really rough form if I see it in a submission? And that's actually a very, it's not an easy skill to hone unless you're very particular about it. I think one of the things I actually tell, people who want to go into editorial to do, aside from reading a lot, is to blog about books, is to review books, because through the process of reviewing, you're able to like really be honest with yourself about why you like something, why you didn't like something. And once you're on that level, you can break it down more and talk about what would you change about a manuscript? What do you think would make it better? And all those elements are the layers that add to what editorial taste becomes. So when I'm thinking about, for myself, for genre, I definitely know I'm a super big idea person. I really like high concept premises, but it has to be something that can also be explainable in 30 seconds or less, because I come from a sales background, so you can, for example, 2 weeks ago, I had one of my books published called The Soul Majestic by Ferret Steinmetz. It's an adult science fiction, and the pitch is it's a restaurant in space for fans of Becky Chambers and The Good Place, about a teenager who's supposed to be a philosopher, but he can't because he's anxious and he's also gay. But when he wins a free dinner at the best restaurant in the galaxy, his whole life changes.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's pretty succinct right there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a skill set that you build up over time. But that's exactly the type of story that I would instantly jump at. It's distinctive. It's kind of quirky. It kind of hints at like a deep dive into something. In this one, it's as you could probably suspect, it's like 5-star cuisine. And half the book talks about how to cook other fancy food. And it's very absorbing and it's beautifully written. But it's also a science fiction story. And it has this whole undercurrent of sociopolitical critique about class and the meaning of labor and taking down the 1%. But it's all told in a very fluffy, lighthearted manner that really punches you in the gut at the very end. And so that's like the other element that I'm really intrigued by with submissions. Like if it has some sort of, a socio-political question that it poses, if it talks about how society and technology relate to each other, how people relate to science, how, a certain fantasy element, like magic could, influence something like gender roles. All those elements as well really attract me to a manuscript. Yeah, I think that's like the nutshell version of what my taste is, aside from actually doing a deep dive into like every single subgenre that I acquire for and what I like and don't like about it.
Oh, I have no doubt there are listeners who would love it if we did nothing else. Well, let me ask you this then. If you've got a book that has that high concept going in, sounds amazing, like, oh my God, we've got Banneker Bones, we've got some giant robot bees, this sounds like it's going to be a winner. What is it that would turn you off? What usually calls the whole thing off as you're reading? And yeah.
Yeah, like for me, there has to be an element of voice. At what stops me in a lot of manuscripts actually is that I'm reading it and it might be a really interesting premise, or it might have, you know, a very like entertaining set of characters, or it might be a genre that I absolutely love usually, but the writing's flat. Like, and that's a really hard thing to explain, like what a writer's voice is. But if I, you know, it's kind of like, I guess the best comparison is that when you watch a television show and you know there's certain directorial choices are being made on screen, or like something about, you know, the lighting or the color, you know, palette they choose, or what kind of characters are on screen and why they're there and what they're doing, you know, all those like elements, you know, you see, you know, visually, I would want to be able to also see visually in my head when I'm reading a manuscript. And if that, you know, cinematic confidence is not in, you know, in the writing, I just can't latch onto it. And I think that's more than anything else why I reject a manuscript, is that when I feel like the voice is not making it, or I get bored. You know, as soon as like I stop reading and I can't pick it up again because I have no motivation to, then like, all right, it's an automatic pass.
Well, sure, yeah. If you're not motivated to read it, it's hard to imagine how the readers you would position it to would want to continue reading it. So that makes sense. Yeah. You mentioned you want to have description. You want to make sure you're painting a picture for the reader. How much? What's the line, or does it vary? I'm sure it does vary from project to project, but just in general, what's a good rule in terms of how to err on the side of enough description without going too much? Like, for example, there's a House in the Witching Hour by Anne Rice that I swear to this day I can still see in my head, because it was just so ridiculously detailed. I think there were blueprints in the back of that book before the end. So where is that line, or is it better just to put too much and then pull back later?
It all depends, because I do think level of description changes depending on what kind of genre you're writing and what kind of market you're writing for. Like, for example, there is a difference between, as you know, like writing for middle grade, writing for young adult, writing for adult, you know, and so that is something that I think about a lot, actually, when I look at manuscripts, especially when it's something that's pitched to me like, oh, it's adult YA crossover. And I'd be like, is it really? You know, are you just saying that because YA is super popular right now? You know? So it does have a certain level of writing that fits the market, that, you know, that is a defining feature. So when it comes to like description, you know, like, for example, like if I were reading an adult literary science fiction or fantasy book, then I do expect a certain level of description that's different than if I were reading, you know, even like a literary YA book or a literary middle grade book. No, so it's really subjective.
That makes sense.
Right.
And what are the most common mistakes that you routinely see authors make that lets you know just right off the bat, oh, I'm dealing with an amateur? Come back in a year or two when you've been doing this a little bit longer.
Like what do you mean by?
Is there anything that, like, the first 50 pages that you might see repeated, some things you've seen in enough submissions now that make you go, oh, this isn't going to be a strongly written piece despite the initial promise? Or is there something?
I think, you know, I think, again, it comes down to the level of writing and the confidence in the storytelling, but also, and this is actually interesting because I think the big difference between writing for genre and writing for literary is the use and handling of tropes. And I think that the assumption is that tropes are bad, that you should avoid all tropes whenever possible. But as a genre editor, like, you know, there are certain tropes that I love. There are certain, like subgenres, there are certain subgenres that I love. And I think a skilled writer knows how to handle tropes well, whether they subvert them, whether they do a fresh take on them, whether they know exactly how tropey they sound, but that's the whole point of the book. And the writing is just so charming, you're just going to go along with it. Like, you know, that actually also ties into a writer's voice. You know, and so I think that is usually like a big signal to me. So if I'm reading like a historical fantasy and it's, you know, it's the farm boy who like goes into like, you know, the big city and realizes that he's the chosen one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It could come off as really like generic and boring, or it could be brilliant depending on, well, what if this, you know, young boy, you know, is a farm boy, but he didn't come to the city because he was a chosen one. He came to the city because he was the best friend who thought he was a chosen one. And then a best friend gets killed 20 pages into the manuscript. And then he's like, oh, what am I doing here? I now have this like quest I never expected I was supposed to do. You know, something like that. So
to take the familiar trope and just kind of flip it on its head a little bit.
Right.
Makes sense to me. And then I wanted to make sure, I wanted to ask you about Maria Miranda Cruz. I promised her that I would, last week we talked a little bit about your hand in editing Everlasting Nora. And then I promised that this week we would ask you your perspective on what that process was like and what drew you to that book initially, since that's something that hopefully the all of esteemed audiences had a week to go out and buy and read at this point.
Oh, yeah. Great. Yeah, and just so you know, I did not listen to Marie's show yet, so I didn't see what she said.
All positive things. She was very excited to work with to have worked with you, and she let us know that she had been filled with dread about the idea of an editor, and you immediately put her at ease, and that your suggestions made the book genuinely better.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's good to know. That's a good jumping off point.
So now you are welcome to trash her just because she said nice things. That doesn't.
she's a delight. She's like an absolute delight. Like, you know, one of the general, you know, blessings I have in my job is that I get to choose exactly who I work with. And I've been also really lucky that I've been able to work with people who are extremely talented, but also generally, you know, kind, considerate, thoughtful, supportive people. And Maria is definitely one of them. So yeah, you know, her book was like totally out of the blue for me because you know, I usually, you know, until I bought Everlasting Nora, I was just strictly a genre editor, you know. I was at Book Expo America and her agent pitched me like all of her projects and she had a PowerPoint, you know, it was like, and she was just going through like, so we went like over all of her science fiction fantasy, and then Marie's book was like stuck, you know, in the middle grade section after it. And one of, and her slide was a picture from Manila's North Cemetery. And as Marie, you know, has probably already explained, like it's a real community in the Philippines. These are actual people who live in mausoleums. And just seeing that picture was just, you know, it was so amazing. Like not because of just like the location, all that stuff, but just the brightness of the colors, just like the lighting. It was a beautiful picture of unexpected joy in what I realized was in the middle of a cemetery. And I'm like, you know, I asked the agent, tell me more about this book. I have no idea what this is. And so she gave me her elevator pitch, you know, and the project had a different name back then. It was just called Cemetery City. And I was like, all right, well, I'll take these for, you know, science fiction fantasy submissions you just pitched me, and I'll take a look at Cemetery City because I am immediately intrigued, you know, and I like stayed up until like 1 o'clock in the morning reading that book. when I was finished, was like, I have to figure out how I'm going to buy this. I have no idea how I'm going to buy this because I've never bought contemporary fiction in middle grade before, but I think this has a lot of potential. And I actually rejected all the other things I requested from that agent. So it was a sign. It was a sign.
Well, she still had to walk away feeling pretty good after that.
Right. And it was, yeah, it's, it's such a, it was such a great editorial process, working with her, because Marie is just she works so hard. She's so generous. She's so receptive. We had really great conversations. And that project in particular was actually like one of the longest editorial processes I've had so far with a project. We went through like 4 or 5 drafts of that book. And usually I do too. So, just because it's like there was so much that I want to do with it, and that we had so many conversations. We had sensitivity readers look at it. We we had several different like really heavy restructural edits for that book. And I think it's also like really a credit to the publisher Starscape when I presented it to her, because she read the manuscript and she said like, I think like it's very interesting, but I'm not sure, if it's strong enough. And I convinced her, no, we have to buy this. If we buy this, I will edit it, with Marie until it becomes a gem, and then like it'll get a lot of like critical acclaim. And that's what I did. So I was like, ta-da! I proved myself, yay!
Well done. I very much enjoyed the book, and I know that the esteemed audience who was all read it at this point did as well.
Great, thank you.
And you mentioned sensitivity readers. She talked a little bit about that as well. What do sensitivity readers bring to a project, and how do you go about finding them for a given project?
Okay, so sensitivity readers are basically like cultural consultants, and actually some of them prefer to be called cultural consultants because it is exactly what they do. They look at a project, usually because they have expertise, in certain types of representation or certain types of culture, community, and they give their critique, about whether things are culturally accurate, whether language choices are appropriate, whether like situations that happen to the characters in the book concerning this cultural element isn't actually a gross stereotype or a harmful, damaging one. So they do, they do a ton of work. And granted, like Marie, grew up, in the Philippines. She's Filipino American. She knows a community. I'm also like I'm Vietnamese American, so I have like some understanding of like Asian American diaspora. But even in that case, even where the book could have been pitched as own voices, I said no. We have to have a sensitivity reader because there are so many elements that we talk about. We talk about poverty. We talk about class. And we also talk about, contemporary Manila, which may be different from, the Philippines that Marie grew up in when she was a younger person. So we have to make sure like all those elements are also accurate to the book. So that's why we got readers for it.
Makes sense. And I wanted to ask you about something you had done earlier in your career. You had been an international marketing assistant for Hachette. So I was just curious what that would have taught you about marketing that you've been able to carry on with you and hopefully still practice today.
Yeah. I love that job. It was something I didn't expect to fall into until I fell into it. I was just trying to get my foot in the door of publishing. And it really taught me a lot of foundational skills when it comes to understanding the industry. It was nice because it was international, that it gave me a perspective of the holistic side of publishing because I worked with all the departments. I worked editorial, I worked publicity, I worked with sales accounts all around the globe, as well as marketing, obviously. And so it really gave me perspective about what the life cycle of a book is, which I might have not have known as well if I start off in editorial. It also gave me, it really honed what I wanted to do with books. And it really taught, and one of the things that it taught me that I carried throughout my career was the most important role that you would have is, as working on a book, is to make sure it finds its readership. And that readership doesn't necessarily mean it's like, books that you like. It doesn't necessarily mean that, it's books that have quote unquote like mass appeal. But it has to be able to find the readership that needs to have that book, and that, and to be able to position a book to find the right market and the right audience is something that I've carried throughout my career. And as an editor, it's super useful because when I look at submissions, I am already thinking about what's the audience for this book. I like the book, that's fine, but how can you convince other people to like it too? Like, what can I go to the publisher and say, like, all right, not only are these the comp titles, but you should look at the demographics, of this community in the United States, the growing readership, the statistics about disposable income, like what all these other factors, will prove that a readership for this book exists. And if the book is available, they will buy it. That was actually one of the reasons I had for buying Everlasting Door in the first place. Like I came in with a bunch of statistics about the Filipino American community in the United States, and the high likelihood that they are looking for more books that represent them because there's so many of them in the United States, and the outcome of books that are published, about Filipinos are so marginally small in comparison that they will grab that book. But not only that, but it has wider appeal for school and libraries because it talks about, young people dealing with very difficult subjects in a light manner. It has a really intriguing hook because, like cemeteries, they're seen in the U.S. as really scary, but in this place it was your home. What does that mean? It talks about the elements of found family and the importance of being able to help each other, and how like supportive communities, are really like one of the backbone themes you see again and again in middle grade. So like all that really helped by that book in particular, but I wouldn't have been able to narrow down my thought process in that granular level if I didn't have the marketing experience to really think about who would want to read this book and why.
And then also to be armed with the information to convince other people that you did know that there were enough folks out there, which obviously hadn't happened. Marie told us one of her main motivations in writing the book in the first place was going to the bookstore and not seeing those books about Filipino children available for anyone who needs to read them.
Right. So.
And that's kind of a big thing we've been harping on this show. And I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but we had Lamar Giles on a few episodes back. We're seeking out the back catalog, and he was one of the founders of We Need Diverse Books. And the whole reason that organization exists is because we need diverse books, and traditional publishers were not supplying them. So obviously, you're doing your part. You've got Marie, you've got many other diverse books that you're editing and selecting. What are you seeing Tor do specifically, and what are you seeing other publishers do to begin to correct this wrong that's been in place for so long?
I think I've been seeing a lot of companies across the board address representation in different ways, and on the reader side, you see it through programs like We Need Diverse Books. You see it by publishers making announcements that they're acquiring, certain authors from underserved communities. From internally, we've also changed our hiring practices, for example, to reflect more inclusive language. Because a lot of one of the barriers I think marginalized people face is not only to have the opportunity to get their voice out there, but just to know that they're encouraged to be there, that it's not just, lip service. And once you get in, you don't get the support that you need. And I think that element is something that the publishing industry is currently working on. When We Need Diverse Books was, founded, the concerns were author concerns, and they're talking about how can we get more authors published. And I think publishers are paying attention to that, but I also believe that in order for like lasting institutional change to happen, it also has to happen internally as well. You have to have your staff be as representative as the books you want to produce, because sometimes they might be the only people who can really find the stories that are worth telling, or be able to, assess the books in ways that they would only understand through their lived experiences to be able to assess a manuscript correctly. Because as you may have heard, like a lot of the books that have been criticized in Kidlit for several years now are usually books that were acquired by editors who didn't have the experience or didn't have, didn't do their due diligence in order to get that experience, to be able to shepherd a project through publication. And that was when you find like the egregious mistakes. That's when you find the cultural appropriation. That's when you find like, terrible stereotypes that, are red flags to readers with that experience, but may have not been, been seen by anyone else because they didn't realize there was a problem. So I think that's really like the next step in the representation conversation, is that how can we transform the industry to be more internally inclusive and retain that talent.
Makes sense to me. So it sounds like we're seeing some headway being made, still a long way to go yet.
Mm-hmm.
And let me ask you, just to help demystify the editing process, or the role of the editor a little bit. What does your day look like? What does your typical work week look like? Are you working over the weekend as well, on average? And how many hours are you putting in a day? And how are you filling them?
It's like, for me in general, like my typical day can be a range of anything and everything that has to do with a book through the life cycle. For example, like today, I am waiting to hear back on an offer I made yesterday, and hopefully I'll hear positive.
Fingers crossed.
But I also wrote cover concepts for books that are coming out in fall of 2020. And then I was reading high priority manuscript that I know that, could have movement at another publisher. And so I have to be able to I got to read this quickly to see if I want to put another offer for this. And I'm also working on, an editorial letter for an adult, fantasy book as well. So, and I also had a lunch meeting with a book scout where we talked about what they were looking at in Hollywood and what kind of IP that they want to acquire and what kind of project that I'm working on would be of their interest. So that is just one day, and and every single day of my week will be drastically different from each other. And right now I have a list of about 15 authors. Not all of them are actively writing, but I am definitely juggling about 4 or 5 books in various stages of their production process as well. So it's just a lot of things happening all the time.
So you can't just concentrate on one book, make your changes, wait for the author to get back to you, and then continue going with that book. Just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't really work that way. I probably at any given day I'm corresponding with at least 3 or 4 authors about whatever questions they have about their book. So that's why you may have heard about the stereotype about the editors editing late hours all the time, or the fact that a common assumption about editorials that oh, you must be reading all the time. And I'm yes, I'm reading all the time, but I'm not necessarily reading during my work hours. During my work hours, I'm doing everything I've told you, plus going to other meetings, plus doing other editorial tasks, whether it's pulling together materials for foreign rights agents, or writing copy to sell books for upcoming seasons, or anything like that. So a lot of my submissions reading no, I do try to have dedicated days where I do not answer email. I just like sit there and like read a bunch of submissions. But other than that, then it's just like, oh, reading at home or reading over the weekend or like reading on the subway, reading all the time.
Just whenever you're not actively doing something else, that's time to sneak in some reading. And are you a very fast reader? Can you turn off your editor brain and just read for enjoyment the first time through, or do you go slow and constantly breaking apart sentences?
I'm a fast reader when it comes to submissions because the first read is the read that you love, because that's that love that's going to actually fuel you to buy the book. And if I keep having, as I said before, like if I stop because I'm bored, or if I stop because I keep seeing mistakes that kind of pull me out of the reading experience, then I know it's not going to be a book that flies with me. So the submission read is always like the most passion driven read, actually, aside from like, now I'm going to break this book down and do line edits, but that's an entirely different type of passion.
Roll up your sleeves and get creative.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of one nice thing about having had several publishing professionals on the show is I'm sure others are listening currently. And so for the agents out there, for the people that are doing the submissions, and of course for the authors who are doing unagented submissions, what kind of information can they provide you with beyond the initial query to arm you when you're going to go and you're going to pitch the book? How much of your homework can they hopefully do for you ahead of time to make things easy, or can they?
I think I've definitely gotten like a range of different materials from authors and agents when it comes to submissions. I have seen agents pull together like a little packet where they would pull up comp titles, pull up like the audience for whatever, or assemble what the author platform would be, like what is their social media presence, what are their professional contacts, all that stuff. Like that is definitely helpful, and that saves me a lot of legwork.
And how heavily does that factor in on your initial decision, social media and the rest?
It really all comes down to the read. It could be nice to know that author has a certain platform, but I think that's more important for nonfiction than fiction. But it does help to know that like, hey, this is a very popular short story, author, and this is their debut novel. That what I would also consider a platform outside of social media, because it shows me like three things. It shows me, one, that they're professional enough to follow directions. That is how they got published, for their short fiction in the first place.
That's important.
Two, someone else likes them. Another editor likes them. So that, and especially if they're published, in certain publications that I'm a big fan of, like, hey, if I know that people at Uncanny Magazine really love this author, and we share common tastes, like, I will give this author a chance, if they have a longer project, for example. And three, it also shows that they have a fan base. If they get published multiple times in short fiction, it's a sign for me that like not only are they professional and other professional editors like them, but that they have enough of a presence in the reading world that the casual sci-fi fan may have heard of their name already, and that only helps me.
Got you. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then back to from the author perspective, has it happened? I'm sure over 8 years with Tor, it probably has happened. If you can give us an example without revealing anybody's name or anything else, where you were on board with the manuscript, you were excited, you had all the information, and then something that the author did either online or in person over the phone, some sort of bad author behavior that blew the whole thing, because I'd love to give that information out for authors so they know what not to do.
Well, I'm lucky not to have that sort of horror story. I mean, knock on wood. Like, I'm sure like every editor will get that project. But I think especially if it's that early on in the process, like even before like I bought something, that instantly would be a red flag. Be like, well, if if like an author, starts like espousing hateful views, online, that would definitely impact whether I want to work with them personally. Because as I said before, like I have the honor of being able to choose every single person I work with. And it's, and it's definitely something I do not take for granted. And also, writing is a creative, endeavor. Editing is a creative endeavor. What I'm going into is, what can be a very deeply interpersonal artistic relationship with, another professional. And if that is going to be difficult on any sort of level, that could, interfere with the creative process or the professional process, then, there are plenty of other authors that I can work with. There are a lot of fish in the sea. So,
unfortunately, stop it, other authors. And then I would kick my own butt if we got through this whole conversation. I didn't ask you about the Wheel of Time. What's been your involvement with the Wheel of Time?
So yes, the Wheel of Time, for those who aren't familiar with it, is one of like Tor's best-selling series. I am currently the in-house editor for it. The actual editor, Harriet McDougall, who is also Robert Jordan's widow. Actually, she was the one who found him. I work with Harriet and the rest of the people at the Robert Jordan estate. In any work that continues the franchise. So right now at the moment, like one of our, huge books coming out this fall is War of the Altai, which is Robert Jordan's previously unpublished novel, that like there's, I think we posted online somewhere, like the whole backstory about why it was unpublished, but it was totally like a weird contractual like thing. It wasn't because the book was bad. It was just, it was a case where he wrote the first novel, and that's how he got, editorial attention, agent attention. But then he started writing like all of these like historical novels, and those historical novels got published first. And because and it was because of that, and the publisher at the time like didn't want to change his brand because they're selling really well. Like, why would we take a risk in publishing him in a entirely new direction? He's already doing so well for this one, so we're just gonna like not publish this, but keep it on the shelf. So we, and yeah, that happens, and that's what happened to this book.
You suggest that a publisher somewhere has made a bad call?
Yeah, it's so it's funny to like, and we're really happy that this book is going to be out in the world. We think that fans of Wheel of Time, and of Robert Jordan will definitely love to take a look at his early work. It does still have like literary merit, even though the Wheel of Time was written later, and of course he had matured his writing style by then. But you can definitely for really both for hardcore fans and for both people who are new to his work, I think it'll be a great entry point for readers.
And how does the process differ? Is it easier if the author isn't there to have as much input, or is it more a matter of curation and making sure that you're doing everything you can to proceed as though Mr. Jordan were there, and obviously his widow has quite a bit of input as well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I work more of like a support position for the book, because it's definitely Harriet. It's like she's always been his editor, throughout their entire lives. So it was a no-brainer that like when she and Tom Doherty decided together that now is the right time to publish this book. She it had already been edited too, first of all, like, so that helped.
That's a difference maker.
Right. So it doesn't matter of like going back and fine-tuning a couple of elements that might, have been a bit dated, by today's standards, streamlining like some of the copy edits that might have not gone through, previous drafts. And it's like, it's basically Harriet and Tom working together to, polish it up before putting it out. So.
Diane, I could talk to you all night because I know you just have a wealth of information and so many things you could reveal to us that I've just been too dumb to ask. If only, but I know you've got a train to catch, and it's a privilege to talk with you. So I want to make sure that we are respectful of your time. So I'll just take all those questions that I should have asked and didn't, and dispel them down to one last question. And that question is, if there was one piece of advice you could give to all of the authors who might be watching or listening that they could follow and their careers would be made better and their writing would be made better, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, that's hard because there's like so much I could like. You're right. So I could go on and on about various.
Feel free to come up with 5 answers.
But I guess like the big thing is don't be discouraged. I know writing can be a lonely business. I know your authors are told no a lot. I understand that it could take years to even find agent representation. But it's one of those things that, writing is a creative passion. But writing can also be a business. And I also want to, encourage authors to think really hard about where they want their writing to go, be realistic about how they want to get there, and be professional, and I think, and above all, don't be discouraged because it's a long process. But I think people who are really determined, and realistic about their goals will be able to achieve them.
Makes sense. If only every author could hear you and heed your advice, we'd be in good shape. And I'm so disappointed we didn't have time to talk about steampunk, but I know you've got a whole website online where people can read everything they ever want to know about steampunk and more. Where can a esteemed reader or esteemed audience find you online and connect with you?
Right. So my steampunk site, if people are super curious, is beyondvictoriana.com. It's about multicultural steampunk. I'm not as active on it as I used to be, but there's a wealth of archives that I definitely encourage people to look into. But where else you can find me online? I have Twitter. It's just Writer Syndrome, one word. I have an Instagram, which is diana.m.pho, and you can follow me there as well.
And I, of course, am on Twitter as MG Ninja. You can always find me at middlegradeninja.com. Head on there. You might have to read some of the interviews with publishing professionals and all of your favorite authors, but they're well worth the read. And there's plenty of great episodes in the archives if you're missing me here over the 4th of July. Make sure you download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, or if you're not into the middle grade, I don't know why you're listening to the show, but you prefer adult horror, check out the first chapter of the Book of David, or check out both. Why not? They're free. Don't forget to contact your representatives, demand impeachment inquiries, head to a protest, stand up for your country. That's what the 4th of July is all about. And find yourself back here on July 8th. We'll be talking with author M.G. Hennessy. That's going to be a wonderful episode. Diana, thanks again for making the time to do this at the end of a long day, with more to be done yet before you can sleep, I'm sure. Really appreciate you making the time and you're sharing your information with the audience. This has just been a wonderful piece of content that I know I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to multiple times to grok its fullness. I have been asking our guests to sign us off, and our sign-off phrase is the very ninja-like "Hi-ya" and what have you. Will you sign us off?
So wait, is it "Hi-ya" and what have you, or "Hi-ya" and that's something I make up?
You know what? Your choice.
Okay. All right. So I will say "Hi-ya," fellow readers, and thanks for being here.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.